This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador Ammar Benjama, has stressed from New York the need to restore the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and implement all stages of the agreement, which has been violated by the Zionist entity. The Israeli army is continuing its barbaric aggression against the defenseless Palestinian people, killing at least 2 Palestinians and wounding several others in a bombardment on the Gaza Strip. And 2 international NGOs have expressed deep concern at the continuing crisis of human rights in Western Sahara, calling on the Security Council to include human rights monitoring in the mandate of the UN mission for the organization of a self-determination referendum in the occupied territories, MINURSO. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. Good afternoon. First in our news, representing the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, the War Veteran Minister, Mr. Al-Idr Biga, was received by the President of Namibia, Ms. Netumbo Nandi Ndaitwah, and in Windhoek, after her swearing-in ceremony coinciding with Namibia's celebration of the 35th anniversary of Independence Day. The ceremonies took place in the presence of heads of state and government, representatives of African heads of state and government, African personalities, and members of diplomatic corps. The minister conveyed to Mrs. Netumbo Nandi Ndaitwah the greetings of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, as well as his congratulations on the occasion of Independence Day and her ceremony or swearing-in ceremony as President of the Republic of Namibia, a sister country. The meeting was also an opportunity to discuss the historic relations between the two countries, which are capable of strengthening cooperation in various fields to the benefit of both the Algerian and Namibian peoples. The French editorialist and international affairs specialist Anthony Bélanger has stressed that France's Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau belongs to a section of the French right that has never accepted that Algeria won its independence and that it was not granted by France. Mariam Bershi has more details in this report.
The French editorialist and international affairs specialist Anthony Bélanger emphasized that Algeria had made a revolution in 1954 when it wrested its independence and said no to France, adding that this part of the French right, in which the military and the establishment had placed so much hope, was still speaking out like Retailleau. The political party La France Insoumise, LFI, for its part said that Bruno Retailleau was using every possible pretext to attack Algeria, stressing that the escalation was aimed at meeting personal interests. Interviewed by France Info Radio, the chairwoman of the LFI parliamentary group, Mathilde Panot, denounced Retailleau's use of all possible pretexts to raise the tone with Algeria and to lead to an escalation that is ultimately aimed at meeting personal interest in his race for the presidency of the right-wing party, Les Républicains. Mrs. Panot added that the French government's escalation against Algeria was irresponsible. On the issue of immigration, Mrs. Panot and LFI MP Éric Coquerel, chairman of the National Assembly's Finance Committee, assured that Algeria had the same rate of acceptance of orders to leave as other countries such as Morocco and Tunisia. Earlier this week, LFI leader Jean-Luc Mélenchon roundly denounced the French Minister of the Interior for his attacks on Algeria, reminding him that it was up to the Minister of Foreign Affairs to deal with immigration issues. As a reminder, several voices have been raised in France to criticize the disinformation campaign waged by French ministers and officials, as well as by the extreme right, to attack Algeria on a daily basis.
And Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador Ammar Benjama, has stressed from New York the need to restore the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and implement all stages of the agreement, which has been violated by the Zionist entity. In his remarks at the monthly Security Council meeting on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question, Mr. Benjama indicated that the terrifying images of the victims of Israel's aggression against Gaza are back, denouncing the blatant violation of the ceasefire agreement in full disregard of the mediators.
The Israeli occupying power have, as expected, shown a different approach. They have resumed their aggression. They have resumed their indiscriminate bombardment of Gaza. they have blatantly breached the ceasefire agreement, completely disregarding their commitments and with no regard for the mediators who are also the guarantor of this ceasefire agreement.
The Algerian diplomat stated that Palestinians in Gaza are frightened, helpless, and devastated after the occupying forces resumed their aggression last Tuesday, killing more than 400 Palestinians in a single night, including 174 children, 89 women, and 32 elderly people, as well as injuring more than 500 others. He stressed that these figures add to the over 17,000 children, 12,000 women, and 2,000 elderly people killed since October 7, 2024. Mr. Benjamin noted in this respect the deaths during the Israeli aggression of an employee of the UN Office for Project Services and 5 workers from the UNRWA, which revealed that the occupation considers humanitarian workers legitimate targets. Algeria's permanent representative to the UN stressed that the protection of civilians, the delivery of humanitarian aid in Gaza, and the respect of principles such as distinction and proportionality and are not an option but a commitment, adding that there must be no double standards when it comes to respecting international law.
Let me be clear. The protection of civilians is not an option. It is an obligation. Facilitating humanitarian aid access is not an option. It is an obligation. Respecting principles such as distinction and proportionality is not an option. It is an obligation. All parties must abide by international humanitarian law and comply with their commitments as agreed in the ceasefire agreement as reflected in our resolution 2735.
Finally, Mr. Benjamin deplored the fact that this Israeli occupation imposes a new reality likely to compromise the establishment of a Palestinian state, thus defying the collective will of the international community and the Security Council.
Israel is a UN member that is openly challenging the collective will of the international community, the will of the Security Council, as no other member has in history. When will we rise to the level of our obligations? When will we impose respect and implementation for our collective decision to establish a Palestinian state with Al-Quds Sharif as its capital?
That was Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador Ammar Benjama. The Israeli army has pursued its bombardments on the Gaza Strip, killing at least 2 Palestinians and wounding several others. According to the news agency Wafa, several others were wounded in the bombardments which targeted the central and northern part of the enclave. A camp sheltering displaced people near the northern locality of Beit Lahia was hit by the Israeli attacks. In this connection, the representative of the Palestinian Hamas movement, Youssef Hamdan, deplored the Israeli occupying authorities' refusal to meet its commitment made as part of the negotiations aimed at securing a cessation of hostilities. Let's listen to him.
المفاوضات لا تزال جارية مع الوسطاء في هذه الأثناء.
The negotiations are still continuing with the mediators to reach an agreement likely to secure a withdrawal of the occupying forces from the Gaza Strip and end to the attacks carried out against our people, at least for 3 or 5 years, in order to rebuild what has been destroyed by the occupying authorities and to heal the wounds of our people. Until then, we will continue to defend our people and our cause. We are a resistance movement. We resist and we defend our people. And we are involved in the negotiating process in line with the occupiers' commitment and the mediators' action designed to rebuild those political bridges that were destroyed when the occupier violated the ceasefire.
It's worth noting that hundreds of Palestinians have been killed and wounded since the Israeli army resumed its attacks on Gaza 5 days ago. And the Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates has condemned the Israeli occupation army's deliberate targeting of the Turkish-Palestinian Friendship Hospital in the Gaza Strip. In a statement, the ministry said that targeting and destroying hospitals, health centers, and medical and emergency personnel constitutes a war crime and a crime against humanity, which is punishable under international law. In Lebanon, new artillery bombardments were today carried out by the Israeli army against several villages and areas in the southern part of the country, including Nabatea. The news agency ANI said that the bombardments took place amid common operations carried out by the Israeli forces in the Himan Hill. And Mother's Day carries different meanings for children and mothers across the globe. It's a day filled with warmth, love, and celebration, except for the Palestinian mothers who continue to bury their children killed by the barbaric Israeli army. Mariam Bershi tells us more in this report.
Mother's Day is celebrating on varying dates worldwide, with many Arab nations observing it on March 21st. However, not everyone marks this day with joy. In the occupied Palestinian territories, notably, the ongoing Israeli occupation has cast a heavy shadow over the occasion. Since October 7, 2023, more than 25,000 women and children have died in Israel's assault on Gaza, with at least 17,000 mothers burying their children and over 50,000 pregnant women losing their unborn babies. Recently, Israel resumed its attacks on Gaza, breaking the ceasefire and launching violent raids that resulted in over 430 deaths and more than 600 injuries, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health. Given these tragic figures, it's clear why Mother's Day has become and will continue to be a day of sorrow for the people in Gaza. For many in Gaza, even visiting a grave has become a luxury they can no longer afford. As many, including journalists, have witnessed countless Gazans, mothers included, being killed and buried in the rubble without receiving a proper burial. Thousands remain trapped beneath the debris, leaving families with no place to mourn. Others have been torn apart, making a proper burial impossible. War in Gaza has taken a heavy toll on women as they try to protect and care for their families in a place where death and suffering are woven through every aspect of life. Despite enduring in the face of a brutal war, these women hold on to love regardless their grief and continue to hope amid darkness.
And two international NGOs have expressed deep concern at the continuing crisis of human rights in the Moroccan-occupied Western Sahara, calling on the Security Council to include human rights monitoring in the mandate of the United Nations mission for the organization of a referendum and self-determination in Western Sahara, MINURSO. Mariam Bershi has more details again.
In a joint statement read out by the Sahrawi activist Hamad Al-Habib, the International Federation for the Protection of the Rights of Ethnic, Religious and Linguistic Minorities and the International Youth and Student Movement for the United Nations expressed concern at the continuing human rights crisis in the occupied territory of Western Sahara, where the Sahrawi people live under a system of occupation that systematically deprives them of their rights. According to the two NGOs, Sahrawi human rights defenders, journalists and students are regularly targeted for denouncing or documenting abuses. They called on the Human Rights Council to play its full role in assisting the people of Western Sahara, the last colony in Africa, and in protecting their human rights. In a report on the situation concerning Western Sahara published in October, the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres expressed concern at the persistent lack of access to Western Sahara by the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, OHCHR. He maintained that the lack of access to first-hand information in the absence of independent, impartial, comprehensive and regular monitoring of the human rights situation have continued to be detrimental to a comprehensive assessment of the human rights situation in the region. Mr. Guterres also said that the OHCHR had continued to receive reports of restrictions, intimidation and harassment of Sahrawi activists defending the right to self-determination, proof, he said, that civic space is increasingly shrinking.
And finally, the national football team has regained control of Group G of the 2026 World Cup qualifiers with a 3-1 victory over Botswana at the Abed Itani Chilium Stadium in Francistown on match day 5 of the qualifiers. And with this, we come to the end of this news bulletin for today. Time now for a weekly program. As racial discrimination rises globally, fueled by far-right ideologies and opposition to diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, the fight for justice grows more challenging. Mariam Barshi, our colleague, interviewed Amri Johnson, a DEI expert, to discuss these trends, their impact, and the path forward. Let's listen to her.
Hello and welcome to Radio Algeria International. As we mark the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, we take a closer look at the growing challenges in the fight against racial injustice. Across the world, we are witnessing a surge in racial discrimination, fueled in part by the rise of far-right ideologies and increasing opposition to diversity, equity and inclusion (DEI) initiative, particularly in the United States. To explore these pressing issues, we are joined by Amri Johnson, an expert in DEI and social justice. He will help us understand the forces driving these trends, their broader social impact, and what can be done to push back against discrimination and exclusion. From your perspective, what are the key factors driving the rise in racial discrimination globally?
So I think the key driving factors in the rise of racial discrimination across the globe has generally been around scarcity. There are people who believe that somebody's going to take their job because they're different than them. And there's been a persistent drumbeat from a small number of people that drive that narrative forward, that these people are taking things away from me. Some of that's related to immigration. A lot of it's simply related to ignorance of what difference actually means. And sometimes that even comes at somebody who has been in that community longer than the person who's making the claim. I do believe that it's a small minority of people who drive the discrimination, and it's usually because they're scared. So scarcity brings about fear. Fear brings about finding a reason for your problem. And if you can find a convenient group of people that you can blame it on, you do it. And because we live in the world of social media, it gets amplified.
Building on that, how do far-right ideology contribute to this trend?
How do far-right ideologies contribute to this trend? Well, I think they contribute mainly because they amplify what I said earlier. They amplify a message that makes an us and them real. It makes it that this group is the group that's preventing you from getting what you deserve. This group is the group that is getting in the way of your success, your financial, your ability to put food on the table, your ability to have the things that you want in life. Now, obviously, that's not true, but if people want to stoke violence, they want to stoke this anti-other sentiment, they can continuously increase it. There are some in some governments around the world that are authoritarian that actually benefit from that type of rhetoric. At the same time, again, I don't believe it's the majority. I think it's a minority of people that have this belief, and it's a minority of people driving this in, oftentimes more so than we've seen before, into young people's minds, which I think is really extremely destructive. And while I'm big on First Amendment rights, I think we need to be teaching people that these things are at best incomplete and at worst extremely dangerous, and they're not helpful to those who believe it, and they're definitely not helpful to those who become victims to that vitriol that often comes in the form of messages and incivility on the streets and things of that nature.
In parallel, in the US, we have seen increasing opposition to diversity, equity and inclusion DEI initiatives. What are the main arguments being used to suppress these efforts?
The main arguments being used to suppress DEI efforts are DEI brings in people that are less qualified. DEI is illegal because it does that. It discriminates against people who are not so-called people of color, and that it is inherently bad for business because these people are not hired on merit, they're hired on their race or their racialization. Now, all of these things are categorically untrue. However, there have been some work done by some DEI practitioners that wasn't good, and it made it seem like it was against a particular group rather than for everyone. And I think those arguments are strong right now, even though they're incomplete or untrue, because of that feeling and the sentiment of some practitioners and the political zeitgeist of the time. It's convenient to have that as a rallying cry for those who are probably at the base of the current administration. So the arguments are there, they're incomplete, they're not true, and there's some opportunity for us to transform that if we really have the data and the facts about what's going on.
As a consequence, how does the rollback of DEI programs impact marginalized communities and society as a whole?
The rollback of DEI programs might impact marginalized communities in that they won't necessarily get the access to certain programs that they might have gotten before. But this is not just about racialized and marginalized. This is about all marginalized communities, because these programs, if they were structured not just for a racialized group, but maybe of predominantly, because there's a correlation between wealth and race that's there because of historical reasons. If you take those away and these programs were made for all marginalized people, everybody is harmed that has not had privilege. And so I think that's the biggest possible hit, that this isn't just about racialized people, it's about all marginalized people. And when you take away these well-structured programs to reduce the gaps in income and in wealth and in things like that over time for those highly motivated, highly skilled, and definitely holding a lot of potential young people coming through systems right now, that's where I think the opportunity is moving forward.
Taking a broader view, to what extent do you think the political climate, notably in the US, is shaping racial discrimination policies and public discourse?
I think the political climate is setting communities and organizations up for high levels of incivility. Now, it might be racialized discrimination that comes of it, but I think a lot of it, where I focus most, is in organizations, and there's going to likely be, if we're kind of already seeing, the place where people believe that they can act and do whatever they want to somebody, and it's okay because it's their First Amendment right. I obviously know that that's harmful to people, and there's a lot of research that says that incivility causes massive issues, from well-being issues to absentee issues to lack of focus, and people talking about this incivility that costs companies money. So the political climate is probably stoking that. And in the public discourse, I think it's already been bad, and it's elevating that. Now it's a choice by people, individuals, to not fall into that trap, but it also gets rewarded. So there's a challenge that we're facing. I think organizations can take hold of it a lot better than we can in the public social discourse, because the social discourse online actually gets rewarded oftentimes for incivility that we can't do anything about, but companies can, because the companies can measure the cost of this incivility, measure the cost of this place where people are acting rudely to each other. They can do something about it.
Looking ahead, what do you see as the most pressing threats and opportunities in the fight for racial justice and equity in the coming years?
I think the biggest threat is that we pull apart as communities and stay focused on what people are, not who they are. The biggest threat is that we don't come together and have contact with each other across our similarities and differences and the tension and complexities that go along with that. And we continue to separate group by group. I think that's the biggest and most threatening opportunity, is the scarcity mindset gets into people in such a way that they separate from each other. And I think that's the biggest challenge. We will not transform racial justice. We will not create greater equity in organizations and in societies by being separated by these notions of what we are and the categories that we ascribe to one another. We can only do that through contact, through dialogue, through getting to know who the other, so-called other, is.
Finally, what message would you like to share with our audience on the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination?
My biggest message to share on International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination: love your neighbor how they need you to love them at any particular time. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be in large amounts of contact with them. They might just need you to understand that they're scared. They might need you to understand that being in contact with them right now is not going to serve any of you. On the other hand, if you can care for them and love them in the many senses of love, mostly the one that says we care for our common humanity, I think you can be in contact and get curious about who people are, not just what they are. And if we can do that on a small scale in our communities, I believe we can do something extraordinary to begin to transform this belief that what we see is real. It's an incomplete notion at best, and in truth, it doesn't exist. It's who we are, the depth of who we are. That's the most important thing for us to understand. And I hope that on International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, that we move towards the elevation of the human spirit, the elevation of our common humanity.
That was Emery Johnson sharing his insight on the challenges and opportunities in the ongoing fight for racial justice. As we reflect on this conversation, one thing is clear: the need for awareness, advocacy and action has never been greater. On the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, let's recommit to building a more just and inclusive society. Thank you for listening to Radio Algeria International.
مع إذاعة الجزائر الدولية لن تفوتكم لحظة واحدة من الأخبار السياسية والاقتصادية الهامة. إذاعة الجزائر الدولية، صوتنا في العالم.
العالم يتغير وبسرعة، ونحن نتابع وبدقة. نحاول الوصول إلى الحقيقة من مصدرها مباشرة. إذاعة الجزائر الدولية، صوتنا في العالم.
إذاعة الجزائر الدولية